second degree, Fellowcraft, or compagnon. To open. Preliminaries of reception. When it is proposed to pass an apprentice to the degree of Fellowcraft, the following provisions are to govern. An apprentice cannot be passed until he has served his time, that is, has been present at 5 meetings of his lodge, for instruction. He ought to be 23 years of age. But this the Grand Master or Inspector General may dispense with, if he is over 21. When it thus becomes permissible, the applicant will apply for the second degree, making his application specially to Venerable Master, on whose column and under whose inspection he will have worked. The lodge may postpone the proposition to another day, if there is not time to discuss the matter fully, or if further information is desired. If it is not proposed to postpone, orator will conclude the passing or delay. Then the ballot will be taken, as to his conclusions, in the manner directed in the apprentice's degree. It requires a vote of 2/3 of the brethren present, to permit the candidate to pass. All the brethren of the lodge must be summoned to attend the meeting at which the candidate is to be passed, and the summons should inform them that there will be a reception in the second degree, so that any who could not attend the previous meeting may be present at this, and object, if they have any good cause. The summons to an apprentice will not mention any work at which he cannot assist. On the day of reception all the brethren will be admitted to the lodge. The lodge of apprentices will be opened, and after reading and approval of the record of the previous meeting, the master will direct the apprentices to retire. But if there be no work to be done in the apprentices' lodge, nor any banquet, the apprentices need not be summoned. In that case, the record of the apprentices' lodge will remain unread, until a meeting of that lodge, when all are present. Reception. A short time only has elapsed since you were initiated and entered apprentice mason. If found qualified, you may now advance, having attended 5 meetings of the lodge, for instruction. It is said that anciently 5 years were required to elapse, which was the time during which those who attached themselves to some sects of philosophy were required to study. The degree of Fellowcraft is fellowship, education, and science. Like the apprentice's degree, it deals exclusively with the moral and political meanings of the symbols, except so far as the philosophical and spiritual necessarily mingle with and interpenetrate morality and political science. Before you can proceed, we must know that you have made due proficiency in the preceding degree. To understand the instruction of this, that of the former must have been understood and must be constantly kept in mind. If you have not taken the trouble of engraving that in your memory, and on the tablets of your heart, or if you are not capable of doing it, self-respect would forbid our casting any further instruction before you. We shall therefore proceed to examine you in regard to the symbolic meaning of the points of your entrance, and of the lodge and its details. Examination. Venerable Master, you are now about to make progress in Masonry. The Fellowcraft's degree is progress. It teaches brotherhood, education, and science. In them and in moral improvement, true progress for the individual or the nation consists. If you would realize what progress is, call it tomorrow. Tomorrow performs its work irresistibly, and it performs it today. It always reaches its aim through unexpected means. It ever goes on, not always steadily, but more often fitfully. It is a workman to whom no tool comes amiss. It adjusts its divine work to the man who strode over the Alps, and the feeble tottering invalid. It makes use of the cripple, as well as the conqueror, of the knave as well as the saint. The delay required to elapse, after you were initiated, before you could be permitted to receive the second degree, was intended to give you the needful time in which to prepare yourself, by imprinting on your memory, so that its characters should remain indelible, the instruction of the first degree, to fit you to make progress in the second. In the ancient mysteries, that interval was of several years. Thus the Egyptian priests tried Pythagoras, before admitting him to know the secrets of the sacred science. He succeeded, by the patience and courage with which he surmounted all obstacles, in obtaining admission to their society, and receiving their lessons. In Palestine the Essenes admitted none among them, until they had passed the tests of several degrees. In this degree the 5 years of study required by group of symbols, Pythagoras are symbolically represented by group of symbols. At the end of each you will receive the appropriate instruction. The rule or 24-inch gauge is one of the working tools of an apprentice. Its meaning was explained to you in that degree. Keep it in mind in this. Disorder is the law of weakness. Let the rule still be to you the symbol of law, order, intellect, controlling and regulating force. Rule, in the Latin, regula, is government, restraint, the limitation and management of force. But remember, also, that it is motion which gives method, on the earth, as in the skies, that reveals power, as among the electrical elements. Movement is the result of an alternating preponderance. The scales of the balance must alternately rise and fall. Immobility would be stagnation and death. Music. The chisel, used by means of the force of the mallet, serves the workman for smoothing and polishing with constant and intelligent labor the materials for his creations. It is, above all, the chief tool of the sculptor, with which he cuts away the envelope that in the rough block of marble conceals and hides the statue, and by which he develops the gladiator, symbol of strength, and the Jupiter of the Capitol, symbol of majesty, or the Venus, symbol of beauty. The apprentice, working with the gavel, employed force alone, cutting down the stone to certain straight lines, marked by the unbending inflexible rule, under the directions of the master. The sculptor, using the chisel, uses it with judgment, and with judgment applies the force of the mallet, whether he carves the beautiful and delicate vase, in accordance with the lines of beauty, creating the graceful wreath and exquisite foliage, or invests the statue with the poetry of his art. Even the stone cutter, shaping the cube, the oblong stone, or the column, and more especially the Corinthian or composite capitals, must exercise his skill and judgment in the use of the chisel. The morality of the line and rule is not sufficient for the Fellowcraft. These will give honesty, uprightness, truthfulness, punctuality, and puritanism. The work of the chisel is wanting, or the character is hard, dry, and ungenial. It is perfected by those genial virtues and fine graces which are not dictated by the stern rules of law, or the 10 Commandments. By generosity, liberality, courtesy, amiability, gentleness, the soft relentings of forgiveness, by all the graces and beauties, which are as the flutings and capital of the column, the curves, the flowers and foliage of the vase. In the apprentice's degree, as in a lower school, are symbolized exact discipline, and the training of the faculties for future use. In this, as in an upper school, you must train thought, that it may at once be wedded with healthy act. Love the truth. Abhor the untruth. That is the first requisite. Without that, you can neither improve yourself, nor serve the people. Let the mallet and chisel first rid you of all duplicity, dissimulation, equivocation, and dishonesty. Until then you are not a man, and circumstances may make you a villain. To secure moral and intellectual freedom to an individual, or political freedom to a nation, is a work of thought, patience and perseverance. It is a work that goes on by slow steps. And the harder the toil with which a people hews the steps out of the solid rock, the surer is the final ascent. If there is any earnest work on earth, it is where the road to freedom is being paved. The tree of liberty must come up at the spot, from the seed, and not be transported bodily, in bulky growth. The thought must explain the trials of the time. But the march in the desert gives the discipline, and temperance will give the triumph. Thought, the noblest characteristic of the isolated man, is also that of a people. Our purpose now is, to teach you to think. Men may become wise without many books. It is true that he is fortunate who has the leisure to study, and add to his knowledge. The Fellowcraft taught, if possible, to obtain a knowledge of the natural sciences. The more he knows of the universe, the better he knows its author. And these sciences, especially geology, necessarily led the student to think and reflect. But the intelligent man may obtain great results by thought alone. Free men are serious. They have objects at their heart, worthy to engross attention. It is reserved for slaves to indulge in groans at one moment, and to laugh at another. Our ancient instruction says, is a symbol of the term of 1 year, which a Fellowcraft was required to pass in perfecting himself in the work of cutting and smoothing the stones, which as apprentice you learned how to rough hew. This work, with the chisel and mallet, is to teach you, that the degree of perfection which an apprentice can attain, is far from finishing his work. That the materials consecrated to the building of the temple which he rears to the grand architect, and of which he is at once the material and the workman, are not yet ready for the building. and that he must still undergo the hard and toilsome labor of the mallet, and learn, accurately and with precision, to use the chisel, never varying from the lines traced for him by the masters. You must interpret and apply this for yourself. Music. It is said that during the second year of the studies of the disciples of Pythagoras, they studied geometry, to which arithmetic is the introduction. In the theory and practice of geometry, the compasses and rule or scale are indispensable. And that is one reason why you have borne them in your journey. The compasses, also, are the symbol of the circles which it describes, and of the celestial spheres. In conjunction with the rule, it represents the divine element, intermingling with the laws of morality and the rules of political science, by which alone perfection, symbolized by the cubical stone, can be attained, or even approached unto. A man may strictly comply with every positive obligation imposed on him by the law, and even with all contained in the moral code, and yet be detestable. A community of men, in which each should punctiliously observe the law and that code, would be one in which no generous soul could live. If the divine, in morals, did not intermingle with the human, the world would be intolerable. The compasses, also, by which round a fixed point we describe the circle, emblem of deity or the supreme wisdom, are themselves an emblem of that wisdom. With their aid, too, upon the base laid down by the rule, we erect the equilateral triangle, symbol of many things, and, to a fellowcraft, especially of liberty, fraternity, and equality. This signifies preparation, the study of principles, which fits a fellowcraft to do the work, whether by the fellowcraft is meant an individual or a people. The practical elements must be acquired, before they can be applied. The elements of mathematics must be thoroughly understood, and its problems demonstrated, by the aid of the figures traced by the compasses and scale, before they can be applied in surveying, or the measurement of land. In navigation, or that of courses and distances on the pathless ocean. In coast surveying, which marks the shoals and reefs that cause shipwreck, and with the aid of the compass, of his reckonings and observations, and of the logarithmic tables, enables the mariner, in the darkness of night, and amid the terrors of the frightful storm, to find safe harbor. Or in astronomy, which measures the distances, orbits, specific gravity, and mass of the planets, and enabled Leverrier to ascertain, before his telescope discovered it, that another planet existed, by the measured perturbations of its neighbors. To all this, science attains, by the use of those simple instruments, the compasses and scale. The line and the circle are the great elements of mathematics. Of these, the scale and compasses are the symbols. From moral rectitude, and the wisdom that teaches love and faith, results the perfection of the individual man, the interpenetration of the human by the divine. And from justice and wisdom results good government in the state. For the rule is the symbol, naturally, of direction and control, of rule, regularity, inflexible or unbending principles. Regular juris, the rules of law, do not shift and vary with the fluctuating tides of circumstance, nor disappear in the presence of necessity or expediency. These are only for today. Principles are for all time, the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. As the deity is all that was, is, and is to be. Tomorrow, necessity and expediency will have disappeared like the mists of morning. The principles will remain and shine with undimmed luster, like the stars. The fellowcraft is, in pursuing his studies, to lay up principles for future use. Remember, that, in all cases, the use of a doctrine, and the only reason for its being promulgated and accepted, is its translation into action. Even the sublime doctrine of Christ is of no great use to the everyday violators of it, how bitterly soever they may hate all dissenters from its truth. Music. During the third year of the studies of the disciples of Pythagoras, it is said in our old rituals, an apprentice is taught how to move and place in position the stones for the foundation of the building, which is done with the aid of the rule and the crow or lever. The lever, it is also said in the same, is the symbol of the power of knowledge, which, adding to our individual strength, enables us to do and effect that which, without its aid, it would be impossible for us to accomplish. Behold, I lay in Zion for a foundation, a stone, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. He that believeth shall not be too hasty. Judgment also will I lay to the line, and righteousness to the plumb. The God of Jacob, it is said in Genesis, is the stone of Israel. The stone which the builders rejected, is become the head of the corner. Ye are no more strangers and foreigners, Paul says to the Ephesian Christians, but fellow citizens with the saints, and of the household of God, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building, fitly framed together, groweth into a holy temple in the Lord. You are now to commence the erection of that temple of virtue, morality, and freedom of the mind and soul, which is symbolized by the Temple of Solomon. That edifice was erected by Solomon on Mount Mori, where before was the threshing floor of Oman or Araunah the Jebusite, purchased by David. The king commanded, and they brought great stones, costly stones, and hewed stones, to lay the foundation of the house. And Solomon's builders, and Curran's builders did hew them, and the stone squarers, or men of Byblos, the Giblemites. The length of the house was 60 cubits, or 102.5 feet, and its breadth 20 cubits, or 34 feet. There was also a porch, or portico, 10 cubits, or 17 feet wide, along the whole eastern front, making the foundation an oblong square, measuring nearly 120 feet by 34. Solomon's own house was much larger, being, with the porch, 221 feet long, by 85 wide. It is the uses for which the temple was intended, that make it symbolical. It was for the public worship of the deity. And in the oracle, Holy of Holies or Kadosh Kadoshim, the western room, the Shekinah or divine presence was supposed to dwell between the cherubim. To the Fellowcraft, as you already know, the temple symbolizes an individual and a state. The foundation of the moral or political temple is to be laid by the help of the symbolic lever, to the lines laid down by the rule, and it is to be laid of great, costly, hewn symbolic stones, like the Cyclopean work of the Etruscan architects, yet to be seen in the ancient foundations of Rome. The foundation stones of the temple still remain, some of them 24 feet in length by 4 in width, beveled in the edges, of a very white limestone resembling marble, and forming, when cemented together, a perfectly solid wall or foundation, which only a convulsion of the solid earth could demolish. Thus firm, solid, stable, and durable should be the foundation of the character which makes the man, of the knowledge which makes the scholar or the statesman, of the state that is to endure. Courage, resolution, decision, firmness, persistence, endurance, hopefulness, self-respect, self-reliance, the chief ingredients of manliness. Forethought, temperance, fortitude, hardihood, energy, justice, rectitude, fairness, loving-kindness, faith and faithfulness, devotedness and disinterestedness, these are the chief of the great, costly, hewn stones of the foundation of an admirable character. Classical learning, the natural and physical sciences, the law of nations, the laws of trade, knowledge of the great commercial currents and financial phenomena, and familiarity with great constitutional principles, are those of the foundation of the learning of the statesman. The great principles embodied in charters of the public liberties, in bills of eight, and written or unwritten constitutions, are those of the foundations of a free state. Let the Fellowcraft, therefore, and even the humblest apprentice be encouraged to work, not apprehensive, in whatever direction he may work, that his labor will be lost. No force, nor any action of any force, is lost, in this universe. There are no blows struck in the void. Paul, after his conversion, was not a person of much consideration, and the sphere of his labors was the preaching of our new and unpopular faith, anti-idolatry in an idolatrous world. He wrote a few letters, all of them together not as long as a single modern speech of some windy Boanerges, letters to handfuls of obscure individuals in the great empire city, Rome, and the great provincial cities of Corinth and Ephesus, and in some Roman provinces, and to the obscure persons, Timotheus, Titus and Philemon, and what a wonderful work in the world those letters have wrought. What, by the side of them, or of Luther's sermons even, are Moscow expeditions and Waterloos. The great works of the world are done unexpectedly, like the invention of printing, by obscure men. Let us all take courage, therefore, and work. Music. During the 4th year of the service of an apprentice, our ancient rituals say, he is employed in the erection of the body of the edifice, and in accurately placing in position the stones of which it is built. and it teaches you, it is there said, that only application, zeal and intelligence can raise the Fellowcraft above the general level of his fellows. A throne, whether of king or free people, should stand on the golden backs of strong lions, bound by the wisdom of the circling serpents, and canopied by the silver doves of mercy. But wisdom cannot be entailed. The lust of idleness is a disease that preys alike on people, peers and princes. History proves that the sense and right of public duty cannot secure exertion. Families perpetually wear out, by the unwillingness of nature to propagate the useless plants. The masonry of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, based on the foundations of morality and manliness, is, first of all, hostility to tyranny. It is the apostolate of liberty, fraternity and equality. A free people may speak its mind with fullness, but after decision it must obey, as well as the serf. Respect for the law should be greater in free states than in those that have masters, and where public opinion has not cut and deepened the great channels. For it is the law made by themselves for themselves. Reverence for the law is self-reverence. For officers, civil or military, who violate it, and usurp power, and crush constitutional guarantees, the mandates of the law should be concise and stern, like those of the 12 Tables. Bullet when usurpation is once in the saddle, it is not easily unseated. The title ripens by prescription, and if the people become a little used to it, only the most intolerable outrages will rouse them to annihilate the newborn despotism. Always remember that you entered here by the right of being freeborn, and therefore oppose the very beginnings of tyranny. Law distinguishes the criteria of right and wrong, teaches to establish the one, and to prevent, redress or punish the other, employs in its theory the noblest faculties of the soul, and exerts in its practice the cardinal virtues of the heart. It is a science, universal in its use and extent, accommodated to each individual, yet comprehending the whole community. It is or ought to be the perfection of human reason, the expression of experience and wisdom, gathered from the whole human family, and applied to the wants of communities. It is founded first on the study of the universal human nature, and that study is a science in itself. It is a moral as well as a practical science. Law is morality in office. It is progressive as man himself, following him with equal steps. It is a heroic work to amend the law. Simplicity and not show, honest administration and not corruption, the silent rule of the law, and not the glittering and noisy empire of arms, are characteristics of free government. Kings parade their power before the people in the midst of armed men, and their reviews are as much meant for their subjects as for the enemy. A free country is not meant for spectacle. They that rule themselves are conscious of their strength, and simplicity becomes splendor. The people grants or revokes the commissions of its generals, the patents of power of its rulers. The allegiance of the willing hearts is beyond that of the bayonets. Conscious strength is silent. The national acts would hardly be known, but for the press. Mankind may not be better than of old, there may be the same old love of lucre, the same lust for power, the same hunger for patronage. But the people act and speak through the press, sit in perpetual oversight of men and the things they do, and drag to light the deeds that delight in darkness. Through it they tell those in power that they are not immortal, and that their power is but a brief trust. If there be trafficking in forbidden wares, the veil is drawn aside at last in the open market. In the end, all things are tested by the square rule. The old Romans gave official nobility. They allowed a man to bear the surname of Africanus, Capitolinus or Coriolanus, and thus linked a noble name to a noble deed, a possession and an example forever. This privilege inspired a family more than a peerage held in heirship. True, the love of excellence is different from the love of distinction, and better. It consists in the desire to do good deeds, and it longs for the words on earth, that many will hear only in heaven, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." But the love of distinction is natural and laudable, and distinction is valuable, when conferred on excellence alone. The badge of honor, or the office, which mediocrity and trickery can attain, loses its virtue in the estimation of honorable minds. A free people should take care not to cheapen its rewards. It is more fatal and more foolish than to depreciate its currency by shamelessly breaking its faith. Wages to the workman, honor to the worthy. A man were better hang himself with the garter of nobility, than wear it when he has not earned it. He only who has borne the cross is worthy to wear it. Let men be bribed and bought with money, if you will, but not with place or honor. Appoint the fittest, and promote the best. Honors distributed by any other rule are dishonors. If you have a vote, you have a voice, indirectly, in the conferring of all honors. And how much or how little soever your vote may weigh, if you do not give it for the best, you to that extent undermine the foundations of the state. Youth will naturally vote for youth, and its knowledge is ordinarily superficial, its counsels rash and impetuous. It is apt to prefer the shallow and the sprightly, to the profound and solid. A single house of legislators, composed chiefly of young men, would prefer the swift speed of impulse to the slow progress of prudence. Hence, in free governments, the legislature is generally divided into two bodies, a lower and more numerous, and an upper, of fewer men, and these of greater age. A free people are ever young, and have the impatient temper of youth. Hence an appeal lies naturally to age. From the man to the sage. From the hour to the year. Age sits in the seat of posterity, and considers its judgment. In this house ought to be gathered up the golden harvest of wise experience. It shall be a real assembly of the notables, of the wise men and elders, deputed by common consent. In a free land the wise men ought to be seen as plainly as the mountains or the monuments. So, in part, with the square and the rule should the house of the temple of a state be builded. Fortunate the workman, who can use well the tools. The 5th year of the studies of the disciples of Pythagoras was devoted chiefly to astronomy and numbers. It is said in our old rituals, that during this year the apprentice studied the theory of architecture, and he was advised, it is said, that it was not sufficient for him to be well grounded in the principles of morality and virtue, but that it would require continual effort and constant self-denial to approach toward perfection. The sword is a symbol of loyalty and honor. It is a significant emblem of the military power, as the defender of liberty. There is a spiritual loyalty, from Thermopylae and Curtius leaping into the gulf, to the latest noble self-sacrifice of heroism. The loyalty of man to man is such, that he will not only kill himself, but his idol, as when Virginius slew his child, and the Roman freedman killed his master to save from worse. Loyalty to kings has been common. 1,000 breasts have often been bared to save the hero from the swords of thickening foes. Napoleon's dying veterans, at Waterloo as at Austerlitz, in direful defeat as well as in glorious victory, uttered with feeble voices their old cry of devotion. The man personified the principle. Men died for glory, honor and duty. The loyalty of the knight to his leader and lady. Of the Jesuit to his order and the successor of Loyola. Of the Templar, the Knight of St. John of Jerusalem and the Teutonic Knight, to his order and Grand Commander. That of the Crusaders to the cross, were all developments of the divine. When men ceased to reverence kings, loyalty became obedience to the law, and the love of the soldier for his colors and captain, and of the sailor for his ship and flag. Thus personal loyalty was sublimated into patriotism and the cardinal virtues. It is a truth in morals that the soul may brutalize the body, as much as the body may degrade the soul. There is reciprocal sympathy between them. The body is not flung beneath the brazen wheels of the car of Juggernaut, until the miserable spirit of the man has already all but perished in the dust before the foul idol. A religion of craven fear, and abortive hopes, without love, as without light and liberty, ends, like the enchantments of Cis, in transforming men into brutes. A sound and healthy and vigorous morality depends upon a healthy religious faith. To get that, is one chief object of your last year of study. We shall in time come to resemble whatever God we believe in. Theory always crystallizes into practice. A cruel God will have cruel worshippers. Man becomes the image of the God of his creed. Every true word is the word of God. He is the great fountain of truth. All true thoughts are inspirations. The true orator is a prophet, the babblers are the prophets of Baal. Speech, thoughts spoken and printed, are the great lever by which nations are moved, the storm winds that lash the great heaving popular ocean into convulsions, the word of Christ, that stills the restless waves. But, unfortunately, all speech is not the utterance of true thoughts, or even of any thoughts whatever. And babble is often more available with the people, than genuine speech. The Mason must be ever ready to defend with arms the old flag of the order, on which are emblazoned the magical words, great always, though often misunderstood, liberty. equality, fraternity. Among the soldiery of this army of freedom may well be that boundless ambition, which is the spur of renown. In it there is no barrier which merit cannot pass. There is an instinct in all freemen that courts the danger leading to an eminence, and makes life weigh a little in the scales against glory and honor. Every free state ought to beware, not only of wars which exhaust, but of governments which impoverish. A waste of the public wealth is the most lasting of public afflictions, and the treasury which is drained by extravagance must be refilled by crime. The apprentice is a youth who has not attained his majority. The Fellowcraft is the citizen entitled to vote, and also entitled, if he can attain it, to office and power. If you should embark in the game of chances called public life, make the square and the rule, uprightness and fair and equal dealing, your rules of action. Cease not to be the gentleman, if you become the candidate. Offer yourself for office, and no more. Become not base in the whining beggary for votes, or baser by trickery and the saying of slanderous lies against an opponent. Neither expect to escape slander, nor cease to be patriotic when misunderstood and reviled, when your motives have been pure. Men will see a fault in the conduct and calumniate the motives. When your conduct has been blameless, they will remember its former errors, and assert that its present goodness arises only from some sinister intention. You will be termed crafty, when you have in reality been rash. And that will be called the consistency of interest, which in reality is the inconstancy of passion. The chief business of party is to traduce the great and elevate the small. Finally, if you discover that you are wanting in foresight, be honest, cease to mislead the people, and retire to private life. Apply the same rule mercilessly to others. The man who blunders today will blunder tomorrow. Nearsightedness of the intellect does not improve by age, like that of the eyes. Music. The degree of Fellowcraft realizes the hopes of him who desires to learn, and of him also who is wise. For in it the secret of our mysteries begins to be opened, and the veil which covers them to be drawn aside. And while he who as yet knows not that secret, sees that everyone may comprehend it, the sage is glad to find himself among his peers. Upon the tracing board of this degree, you see the representation of the front of King Solomon's temple, with a winding stairway of 3, 5, and 7 steps. It is the great symbol of our order, and has more than one meaning. Whether you will learn them all, will depend upon yourself. The value of the secret is in proportion to the intelligence and excellency of him to whom it is entrusted. The man to whom virtue is but a name and liberty a chimera, will little value the light you have already received. And he to whom philosophy is foolishness will less value that which is perhaps to be given you hereafter. The bats and the owls prefer the obscure twilight to the light of noonday. As little can the selfish and heartless value as an emblem the chain which encircles the temple, with its 81 mystic knots. They can neither appreciate the brotherhood of an order like ours, nor that electric chain of sympathy, which, causing the fate of every man and his conduct to be influenced and controlled by the actions and fortunes of others, makes of a people, and even of the whole human race a single individual. The temple is, among other things, a symbol of science. The man who is familiar with the mechanism of the universe, and its phenomena, with the laws that govern the movements of the spheres, singularly connected as they are with numbers, with the laws of generation, growth and crystallization, with the world of vegetation, the organic revolutions of the earth in past ages, and the marvelous wonders of minute life disclosed by the microscope, will have developed his reason and parted with the absurd notions of childhood and ignorance. The natural and physical sciences are the great, costly, hewn stones of the temple of science. Pythagoras inscribed on the door of his temple these words, "He to whom geometry is unknown, is not worthy to enter into this sanctuary." By geometry, we have already said, is meant the mathematics, or the science of numbers. Mathematical demonstration attains its results with unerring certainty. Numbers, to Pythagoras, were the first principles of things, and the natural laws, of the distances and orbits of the spheres, and the forces of gravity and attraction are singularly connected with them. It has not been deemed irreverent to characterize the deity as the great geometrician, as well as the grand architect of the universe. The Masonry of the York Rite applies the number 5 particularly to the orders of architecture, the Tuscan, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian and Composite, and the number 7 to what were once styled the liberal arts and sciences, grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music and astronomy. 5 is also remarked upon as connected with the senses. That Rite has selected the least striking illustrations or applications of these numbers, and the rudimental information it gives on these subjects may be read in any of the monitors, and is familiar to schoolboys. The 3 first steps of the temple of individual perfection are faith, hope and loving kindness. The next 5, number of the aggregate of the senses and of that of the orders of architecture, symbolize the aggregate of the manly virtues and moral excellences. The 7, number of what were once called the liberal arts and sciences, symbolize the aggregate of learning and intellectual acquisitions which adorns and completes the character. In the state, the 3 steps are liberty, equality and fraternity. The 5, the great institutions of the state, which are the executive power, the legislative authority, the judicial interpretation, the church and the army. The 7 symbolize the arts and sciences, fostered by and adorning the state. The 5 orders of architecture may also be symbolic of the 5 principal divisions of the religions. Polytheism, the philosophic paganism of Athens and Alexandria, of Socrates, Plato and Hypatia. Hebraism, Christianity, and Mohammedanism, and also of the 5 different forms of government: the patriarchal, the despotic, the oligarchic, the democratic, and the limited monarchical, thus opening to the Fellowcraft a vast field of study. The blazing star is the symbol of civilization and enlightenment, the liturgy, of the deity, of geometry and all the arts and sciences, and of government. Your toils as a Fellowcraft are now to begin. You have completed your work as an apprentice. To the place whence he came, and there let him be reinvested with that whereof he was divested, and return to the lodge for further instruction. Music. Hereafter, my brother, you are to labor upon the pointed cubical stone, or the cube, with the pyramid erected on one face, and you will receive your wages at the column bows. And this new work, our old rituals say, should remind you that a Fellowcraft, whose business it is to keep the building in repair, ought to use every exertion, not only to conceal the faults of his brethren, but by his example and counsel to lead them to reform. Always we encounter the same trivial and commonplace explanations. The cube, with the pyramid superposited, is the symbol of a free state. The cube represents the people. The 4 faces of the pyramid are the departments to which the people commits its powers: the executive, legislative and judicial, and the church. These unite in the single point of unity of will and action. On this you are to work. It is therefore necessary you should have working tools. Those of the Fellowcraft are the square, the level and the plumb. The square, you already know, is the jewel of the master, the plumb of the senior warden, and the level of the junior warden. They symbolize the building squarely up, with great stones laid truly and horizontally, the perpendicular walls of the fabric of individual character, and that of the state. They are also symbols of the 3 great powers of the state, on the healthy and independent action of each of which, and the performance by each of its appropriate functions, depends the continuance of the state. The square is a symbol of control, and therefore of the executive power, vested in the hereditary or elective chief magistrate. The plumb is a symbol of rectitude or uprightness, of inflexible law and regulation, and therefore of the legislative power. And the level is a symbol of equality in the sight of the law, and of impartiality, and therefore of the judicial power. They are power, wisdom, justice. The law is the same for the state as for the individual. Calamity shall follow as the consequence of wrong. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly. He that despiseth the gain of oppressions. That shaketh his hands from holding of bribes. That stoppeth his ears against bloody advice, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. He shall dwell on high, his stronghold the impregnable rocks. Bread shall be supplied him, and water not fail. In the ancient English work of this degree, the staircase consisted of 11 steps, in 5 divisions. The mystic numbers, 3, 5, 7, and 11, following each other. The number 5 reminded the candidate of the 5 remarkable points in the ever-blessed career of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, and 11, the miraculous preservation of Joseph, who preceded his 11 brethren into Egypt. These are mere puerilities. The numbers and stairway are Kabbalistic. In that system of philosophy, there are 10 emanations from the deity or Sephiroth, through which one ascends in thought to the absolute, nameless, unmanifested deity, and with these is death, human thought, product of the divine wisdom and the human understanding. The Hebrews attached a numerical value to every letter. The great name of the deity, which we render Jehovah, was composed of 4 letters. 3, with one repeated, Yud, He, Vav, He, and the numerical value of these letters, in the same order, was 10, 5, 6, 5, which added together make 26. 3, 5, 7 and 11 make also 26. 12. The cross is the symbol of devotedness and self-sacrifice. From the time of the Crusades, it has belonged to Fellowcraft Masons. Pointing to the 4 quarters of the compass, consisting of 2 lines intersected at right angles by each other, so that, though infinitely prolonged, no 2 of the extremities could ever meet, it was honored as a striking symbol of the universe by many nations of antiquity, and imitated by the Hindus and Celtic Druids in the shape of their temples. The crux and zeta was a cross, with the serpent in a circle above it. The Tau cross is a most ancient symbol. And the Lord said unto him, says Ezekiel, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and make the letter Tau upon the foreheads of those at Sion mourn for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. The Tau was the emblem of life and salvation. It was set on those who were acquitted by the judges, as a symbol of innocence, and the military commanders placed it on soldiers who escaped unhurt from the field of battle, as the signs of their being saved by the divine protection. Stat crux, dum volvertur orbis, the cross stands, while the world revolves, was the device given his order by Martin, the 11th general of the Carthusians. So let Freemasonry always stand, true to her ancient principles, the champion and tribune of the peoples, the advocate of the rights of man. Whatsoever revolutions there may be in the profane world. In your studies, you will have constant occasion to remark how extensive has been the corruption of words, how general the loss of the true meaning of the symbols. A rite which transmuted Pythagoras, a native of Crotona, into Peter Gower, an Englishman resident at Groton, in England, owes it to accident, if it has preserved anything accurately. Take, for example, the word shibboleth. A Roman name of Jupiter was lapis, a stone, or lapidum, stony. In making bargains, the swearer held in his hand a flint stone, and said, If knowingly I deceive, so let Dispiter, saving the city and the capital, cast me away from all that is good, as I cast away this stone. Whereupon he threw the stone away. Hence the origin of the term, Sibolithon, I keep the stone. Applied among our ancient brethren as a testimony of retaining their original vow, uninfringed, and their first faith with the brotherhood uncorrupted. Our old rituals say that the blazing star is the emblem of that genius which soars to the loftiest heights, and the symbol of that sacred fire with which the grand architect of the universe has endowed us, by the light of whose rays we must discern, love and practice truth, justice, and equity. The delta, they said, which you behold all blazing with light, offers you 2 great truths and 2 sublime ideas. You behold the name of God, as the source of all knowledge and all science. It is symbolically explained by geometry. This sublime science has for its essential basis, the profound study and infinite applications of triangles, under their veritable emblem. All these mysterious truths will develop themselves to your eyes in succession, and in proportion as you advance in our sublime art. My brother Fellowcraft, always remember that Masonry does not seek to explain its purposes, and still less to expound its philosophy and dogma to those who have not entered its sanctuaries. Very properly its teachings are confined to the initiated. It does not seek to make proselytes nor to preach its truths upon the highways. It needs defense, apology, and vindication or excuses as little as religion does. We, in this rite, declaim for Masonry that it is a religion, for it recognizes the great religious truths of the existence of the deity and the immortality of the soul. Upon these broad truths religion has fixed its foundation. In enforcing these truths, we do not usurp the prerogatives of the priest or pontiff. Side by side at our altars the Christian, the Jew, the Brahman, the Turk, and the Parsi, can kneel and acknowledge the one God and Creator. If morality is a part of religion, then we teach a pure and perfect system, not taken from the books of any one religion, but from the teachings of Confucius, Zarathustra, Buddha and the Brahmins, from the Vedas, the Zendavesta, and the Quran, as well as from Plato and Seneca, Moses, Paul, and Jesus of Nazareth. If morality is not a component part of religion, then we invade the domain of no religion by teaching it. If the knowledge of the Creator, of His designs, purposes, motives, and nature, is no part of religion, we may rightfully learn these from the Book of Nature, God's earliest revelation. His hieroglyphics are seen in every tree and shrub, in the water and on the land, in every animate and inanimate thing. Science makes men God's interpreters. The man of science deciphers his hieroglyphics. And as he comes to know and understand better those symbols, he has a larger and better knowledge of the deity. If a true and sound philosophy as to the deity and nature is not a part of religion, that which remains after they are taken away, constitutes a realm of thought undisturbed by us, and to which the ministers of religion are welcome. Masonry to the Masonic brethren is a search after, and a journeying toward light. The Masonic light is truth. It is the inculcation of truth by means of symbols and instructions. Teaching a pure morality by its lessons and lectures, it is also a great system of philosophy and of political and of religious truth concealed by symbols. It is this, with a veil unraised, holding out to the initiated the symbols it inherits from the ancient mysteries, the same that were used by the sages of ancient India, Persia, Egypt, and Greece. Masonry is not opposed to any religion, nor does it seek to take the place of any religious faith. It has a creed that underlies all religions. It has always been, and is now, opposed to persecution for opinion's sake. Through its teachings it is the apostle of toleration. Eminent divines of the Episcopal, the Presbyterian, the Baptist and the Catholic sects, the Rabbi, the Brahman, the Mohammedan, can kneel hand in hand at its altars, since they all believe in the one living God. Christian divines by thousands belong to our order, not only in this land, but in other countries, all assenting not only to the moral teachings and simple doctrines of the blue or symbolic degrees, but to the wise doctrines of the new law of love taught by it elsewhere. My brother, every order and association, like every man, and every nation, has duties commensurate with its means, powers and capacities. Our Lord, Jesus of Nazareth, taught us that, by the parables of the unprofitable servant and of the wise and foolish virgins, we are all the almoners of God, not only to dispense in charity the wealth and goods He lends us, but to use for the benefit of others, and of society, all else with which He has so richly endowed us, our influence, intellect, knowledge, or the forces of our physical and intellectual nature. Unless we are faithful to these trusts we do not ascend from the square to the compasses, nor advance from the high place of Gibeon to the threshing floor of Oman, the Jebusite. We must account to Him for all the intelligence and influence and other gifts He has so bountifully bestowed upon us. Do we use to the utmost for good the power and influence which association gives us? Do we fully appreciate what are the great forces by which the destinies of communities and nations are controlled? Every force of nature is a direct exertion of omnipotent power. The powers of government are not chief of these. History, for the most part, only babbles when it tells us what was done by statesmen and soldiers. The scholar who drafted Magna Charta was the great English legislator, and infinitely greater than King John, who merely put his name to it. Legislation and the making of statutes are but of secondary importance to the preconceived opinions of the people. Legislation cannot lead or form those opinions. The power of legislation is only a power of police and taxation. There are now 9/10 of the statutes of our law books that are a dead letter, being framed only for the exigencies of the occasion existing at the time when they were passed. Legislators are only the blind instruments of providence. The past makes laws for the present and future. It is the debt to govern, and the living obey their mandates. The statesmen of the present age are the slaves of those who have preceded them. They are mere puppets, moved by invisible wires. The real legislators of the world are not those who now make the law. They are the men who died centuries ago. Moses, Plato, Confucius, Zarathustra, Mohammed, Paul, and Alfred the Saxon. Those great Roman lawyers, Paulus, Gaius, Ulpianus, Perpinianus, and those who, under Justinian, revised the legal code. We are making laws for the future, as those who have preceded us made laws for us. It is not done by legislative enactments, but by our every word and action. Every word we speak is either for good or evil, and, therefore, our examples should always be for good. The press is a power of the same kind, which controls and forms the opinions of the people. The most potent of the moral forces are thought, the will, example and influence, sympathy and loving kindness. A heroic thought uttered by one man even in a solitude, but written down and repeated, may never die, but finding a response in the hearts of others may become a trumpet call to arouse the future generations and be the cause of revolutions, and no one is ignorant of the immense force of individual will. Influence and example have in all ages exerted their power and sympathy. When Masons clasp hands, what a magnetic thrill passes from heart to heart. The power of loving kindness is perhaps the greatest of them all. It makes the warrior as gentle as the woman, and softens the asperities of life. And then the power of growth. The small seed is planted, and remains undisturbed for a time, and you find that it has shot forth a little tender shoot, which you may nip off, if you choose, with your fingernail. Leave it alone, to grow. Visit it again, by and by, and you shall find that the plant has forced its root to the depth of a foot or more into the ground. Can anyone tell how it grows, or what its force is? No one knows but the Almighty, who causes it to grow and flourish. Nations and orders grow in the same way that plants do, they also having their vital force of growth. The vast power of association is very sensibly felt in our lodge rooms and temples, where that sympathy and loving kindness, which are so like the sunshine and the rain, and the dew which falls upon the growing plant, should create that magnetic attraction which bind heart to heart in unity. The growth of Masonry is a necessity to its being. Let it grow, for it does some good to every Mason, and all other voluntary or involuntary instruments of its purposes. We cannot isolate ourselves from our fellow men who are not of our craft. The evils of society affect us as well as others. We are all shareholders in the public morality, and our Masonry must be made to prove its titles to respect by its good influences in the world outside of our lodges. Masonry combines all the forces that we have enumerated. It is an association for a common object, and in its possession of these its growth must inevitably resemble and be analogous to that of nature. It has the power of thought, and thoughts that are wise and true are laws of the human race. It has the force of will, which, in a just undertaking, may be irresistible. It has the powers of example and influence. It is already felt in the farm, the marketplace, in the church and the halls of legislation. It has but to avail itself of its legitimate powers and forces, to become the greatest benefactor of humanity. If it can become the master of religious prejudice and intolerance, and even maintain its sovereignty over men's hearts during the clash and conflict of civil war, what may it not effect in the days that are to come? It is not to be expected that our order shall be always prosperous, nor is it desirable. Reverses must overtake it. Periods of persecution, of apathy and lukewarmness must come. Unvarying prosperity will be full of dangers to it, for then it will commit fatal errors. We are thus taught bravery and endurance, and never to be discouraged nor disappointed. But we are taught still other lessons, that the life of man is like the ascent of the mountain. He must slide backward, become at times faint-hearted, wander into bypaths, commit errors, have his lapses, his aberrations of mind, his hours of folly, and nights of regret. We must not judge him by these, for they are inevitable. Let us not recount and lament with idle wailing life's ills and maladies, but earnestly set to work to cure them. The journey of life, and the onward march of an order or a nation, are not over a level plain. For a time it may be so for either, but the rugged mountain to be scaled always comes at last. The journey over the plain is not the march of heroes, nor our honor and glory won by it. Indolence may saunter over the dead level, but the climber of the mountain, whether man, order or nation, must possess endurance, persistence and resolution. Oftentimes he will be forced back, but must gain strength to start anew. He must surmount obstacles of every kind and expect to encounter many dangers. Many will grow faint and weary, and halt for rest in some tempting spot that invites ease and indolent indifference. Many will essay byways and paths that seem easier and smoother than to go in the straight and narrow way ever upward and onward. Some of these will lose their footing and fall over the precipices that are on every side, and some the avalanches will overwhelm. To face these dangers and overcome these trials is the pride of every human life and the glory of every order. Very little is to be learned by him who saunters over the plains and loiters in the glade or meadow. Finally, my brother, we are all passing away, and none of us, perhaps, will live to see the full glory of the order. The symbolic temple is still in building, and sometimes the hands of the workmen on the walls grow weary. The Holy Empire is not yet established. We work for the future as the men of the past worked for us. Those who are Masons after us shall see, if our eyes do not behold it, the full glory of the work whose foundation has been so well laid. The leaves fall upon the root, but the tree continues to grow. The tree of Masonry continues to grow, fed by the living springs of truth. The croak of clerical ravens and the chattering of surpliced jays may predict decay for it, but the ages will mark the periods of its growth as the years with consecutive rings do those of the oak. The lightnings of excommunication will fail to shatter its branches. No storms of persecution can uproot it and lay it prostrate. Freemasonry is of God as truth is. The powers of darkness cannot prevail against it, and beneath its branches the world shall at last have peace. Your toils as a Fellowcraft are now to begin. You have completed your work as an apprentice: secrecy, fidelity, assistance, comfort, warning, obedience. S. Worshipful Master. G2. The catechism is repeated before closing, when it is thought proper, and there is time. Or it may be done at another meeting.